Chapter 17 of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. He waited an eternity. In actual time, it was exactly 10 minutes. Then a cavalcade tramped down the hall. He heard their voices, and Hal Dozier was among them. About him flowed a babble of questions as the men struggled for the honor of a word from the great man. Perhaps he was coming to his room to form the posse and issue general instructions for the chase. The door opened. Dozier entered, jerked his head squarely to one side, and found himself gazing into the muzzle of a revolver. The astonishment and the swift hardening of his face had begun and ended in a fraction of a second. "It's you, eh?" he said, still holding the door. "Right," said Andrew. "I'm here for a little chat about this Lanning you're after." Hal Dozier paused another heartbreaking second. Then he saw that caution was the better way. "I'll have to shut you out for a minute or two, boys. Go down to the bar and have a few on me." He turned, laughing and waving to them. Then the door closed, and Dozier turned slowly to face his hunted man. Into Andrew's mind came back the words of the great outlaw Allister: "There's one man I'd think twice about meeting, and that—" "Sit down," said Andrew, "and you can take off your belt if you want to. Easy, that's it. Thank you." The belt and guns were tossed onto the bed, and Hal Dozier sat down. He reminded Andrew of a terrier, not heavy, but all compact nerve and fighting force. "I'll not frisk you for another gun," said Andrew. "Thanks. I have one, but I'll let it lie." He made a movement. "If you don't mind," said Andrew, "I'd rather that you don't reach into your pockets. Use my tobacco and papers if you wish." He tossed them onto the table, and Hal Dozier rolled his smoke in silence. Then he tilted back in his chair a little. His hand with the cigarette was as steady as a vice, and Andrew, shrugging forward his own ponderous shoulders, dropped his elbows on his knees and trained the gun full on his companion. "I've come to make a bargain, Dozier," he said. The other made no comment, and the two continued that silent struggle of the eyes that was making Andrew's throat dry and his heart leap. "Here's the bargain. Drop off this trail. Let the law take its own course, through other hands. But you give me your word to keep off the trail. If you'll do that, I'll leave this country and stay away. Except for one thing. I'll never come back here. You're a proud man, and you've never quit a trail yet before the end of it. But this time I only ask you to let it go without running me out of the country." "What's the one thing for which you'd come back?" "I'll come back once, because of a girl." He saw the eyes of Dozier widen and then contract again. "You're not exactly what I expected to find," he said. "But go on. If I don't take the bargain, you pull that trigger." "Exactly." "You may have heard the voices of the men who came up the hall with me." "Yes." "The moment a report of a gun is heard, they'll swarm up to this room and get you." "They've made too much noise. Barking dogs don't bite. Besides, the moment I've dropped you, I go out that window." "It's a good bluff, Lanning," said the other. "I'll tell you what. If you are what I expected you to be, a hysterical kid who had a bit of bad luck and got rolled together, I'd take that offer. But you're different. You're a man. All in all, Lanning, I think you're about as much a man as I've ever crossed before. No, you won't pull that trigger, because there isn't one deliberate murder packed away in your system. It's a good bluff, as I said before, and I admire the way you worked it. But it won't do. I call it. I won't leave your trail, Lanning. Now, pull your trigger." He smiled straight into the eye of the younger man. A flush jumped into the cheeks of Andrew, and fading, left him by contrast paler than ever. "You are 1/4 of an inch from death, Dozier," he replied. "Lanning, with men like you, and like myself, I hope, there's no question of distance. It's either a miss or a hit. Here's a better proposition. Let me put my belt on again. Then put your gun back in the holster. We'll turn and face the wall. And when the clock downstairs strikes 10, that'll be within a few minutes, we'll turn and blaze at the first sound." He watched his companion eagerly, and he saw the face of Andrew work. "I can't do it, Dozier," said Andrew. "I'd like to, but I can't." "Why not?" The voice of Hal Dozier was sharp with a new suspicion. "Get me out of the way and you're free to get across the mountains, and once there your trail will never be found. I know that. Everyone knows that. That's why I hid up here after you." "I'll tell you why," said Andrew slowly. "I've got the blood of one man on my hands already, but so help me God, I'm not going to have another stain. I had to shoot once because I was hounded into it. And if this thing keeps on, I'm going to shoot again and again. But as long as I can, I'm fighting to keep clean. Do you understand?" His voice became thin and rose as he spoke. His breath was a series of gasps, and Hal Dozier changed color. "I think," said Andrew, regaining his self control, "that I'd kill you. I think I'm just a split second surer and faster than you are with a gun. But don't you see, Dozier?" He cast out his left hand, but his right hand held the revolver like a rock. "Don't you see I've got the taint in me? I've killed my man. If I kill another I'll go bad. I know it. Life will mean nothing to me. I can feel it in me." His voice fell and became deeper. "Dozier, give me my chance. It's up to you. Stand aside now, and I'll get across those mountains and become a decent man. Keep me here and I'll be a killer. I know it. You know it. Why are you after me? Because your brother was killed by me? Dozier, think of your brother and then look at me. Was his life worth my life? You're a cool headed man. You knew him, and you knew what he was worth. His killings were as long as the worst bad man that ever stepped, except that he had the law behind him. When he got on my trail, he knew that I was just a scared kid who thought he'd killed a man. Why didn't he let me run until I found out that I hadn't killed Buck Heath? Then he knew, and you know, that I'd have come back. But he wouldn't give me the chance. He ran me into the ground and I shot him down. And that minute he turned me from a scared kid into an outlaw, a killer. Tell me, man to man, Dozier, if Bill hasn't already done me more wrong than I've done him." As he finished that strange appeal, he noted that the famous fighter was white about the mouth and shaken. He added with a burst of appeal, "Hal, you know I'm straight. You know I'm worth a chance." The older man lifted his head at last. "Andy, I can't leave the trail." At that sentence every muscle of Andrew's body relaxed, and he sat like one in a state of collapse, except that the right hand and the gun in it were steady as rocks. "Here's something between you and me that I'd swear I never said if I was called in a court," went on Hal Dozier in a solemn murmur. "I'll tell you that I know Bill was no good. I've known it for years, and I've told him so. It's Bill that bled me and bled me until I've had to soak a mortgage on the ranch. It's Bill that's spent the money on his cussed booze and gambling. Until now there's a man that can squeeze and ruin me any day, and that's Merchant. He sent me hot along this trail. He sent me, but my pride sent me also. No, son, I wasn't bought altogether, and if I'd known as much about you then as I know now, I'd never have started to hound you. But now I've started. Everybody in the mountains, every puncher on the range knows that Hal Dozier has started on a new trail, and every man of them knows that I've never failed before. Andy, I can't give it up. You see, I've got no shame before you. I'll tell you the straight of it. I'll tell you that I'm a bought man, but I can't leave this trail to go back and face the boys. If one of them was to shake his head and say on the side that I'm no longer the man I used to be, I'd shoot him dead as sure as there's a reckoning that I'm bound for. It isn't you, Andy. It's my reputation that makes me go on." He stopped, and the two men looked sadly at each other. "Andy, boy," said Hal Dozier, "I've no more bad feelings toward you than if you was my own boy." Then he added, with a little ring to his voice, "But I'm going to stay on your trail till I kill you. You write that down in red." And the outlaw dropped his gun suddenly into the holster. "That ends it, then," he said slowly. "The next time we meet we won't sit down and chin friendly like. We'll let our guns do the talking for us. And, first of all, I'm going to get across these mountains, Hal, in spite of you and your friends." "You can't do it, Andy. Try it. I've sent the word up. The whole mountains will be alive watching for you. Every trail will be alive with guns." But Andrew stood up, and using always his left hand while the right arm hung with apparent carelessness at his side, he arranged his hat so that it came forward at a jaunty angle, and then hitched his belt around so that the holster hung a little more to the rear. The position for a gun when one is sitting is quite different from the proper position when one is standing. All these things Uncle Jasper had taught Andrew long and long before. He was remembering them in chunks. "Give me 3 minutes to get my saddle on my horse and out of town," said Andrew. "Is that fair?" "Considering that you could have filled me full of lead here," said Hal Dozier with a wry smile, "I think that's fair enough." Chapter 17. Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. As Andrew went down the stairs and through the entrance hall, he noticed it was filled with armed men. At the door he paused for the least fraction of a second, and during that breathing space he had seen every face in the room. Then he walked carelessly across to the desk and asked for his bill. Someone, as he crossed the room, whirled to follow him with a glance. Andy heard, for his ears were sharpened. "I thought for a minute but it does look like him." "Aw, Mike, I seen that gent in the barroom the other day. Besides, he's just a kid." "So's this Lanning. I'm going out to look at the poster again. You hold this gent here." "All right. I'll talk to him while you're gone, but be quick. I'll be holding a laugh for you, Mike." Andrew paid his bill, but as soon as he reached the door, a short man, with legs bowed by a life in the saddle, waddled out to him and said, "Just a minute, partner. Are you one of us?" "One of who?" asked Andrew. "One of the posse Hal is getting together. Well, come to think of it, I guess you're a stranger around here, ain't you?" "Me?" asked Andrew. "Why, I've just been talking to Hal." "About young Lanning?" "Yes." "By the way, if you're out of Hal's country, maybe you know Lanning, too?" "Sure. I've stood as close to him as I am to you." "You don't say. What sort of looking fellow is he?" "Well, I'll tell you," said Andrew, and he smiled in an embarrassed manner. "They say he's a ringer for me. Not much of a compliment, is it?" The other gasped and then laughed heartily. "No, it ain't at that," he replied. "Say, I've got a pal that wants to talk to you. Sort of a job on him, at that." "I'll tell you what," said Andy calmly. "Take him into the bar, and I'll come in and have a drink with him and you in about 2 minutes. S'long." He was gone through the door while the other half reached a hand toward him, but that was all. In the stables he had the saddle on the chestnut in 20 seconds, and brought him to the watering trough before the barroom. He found his short, bow-legged friend in the barroom in the midst of excited talk with a big blond man. He looked a German, with his parted beard and his imposing front, and he had the stern blue eye of a fighter. "Is this your friend?" asked Andrew, and walked straight up to them. He watched the eyes of the big man expand and then narrow. His hand even fumbled at his hip, but then he shook his head. He was too bewildered to act. At that moment there was an uproar from the upper part of the hotel. With a casual wave of his hand, Andy wandered out of the barroom and then raced for the street. he heard men shouting in the lobby. A fighting mass jammed its way into the open, and there, in the middle of the square, sat Hal Dozier on his gray stallion. He was giving orders in a voice that rang above the crowd and made voices hush in whispers as they heard him. Under his direction the crowd split into groups of 4 and 5 and 6 and rode at full speed in 3 directions out of the town. In the meantime there were 2 trusted friends of Hal Dozier busy at telephones in the hotel. They were calling little towns among the mountains. The red alarm was spreading like wildfire, and faster than the fastest horse could gallop. But Andrew, with the chestnut running like a red flash beneath him, had vanished. Buried away in the mountains, one stiff day's march, was a trapper whom Uncle Jasper had once befriended. That was many a day long since, but Uncle Jasper had saved the man's life, and he often told Andrew that sooner or later he must come to that trapper's cabin to talk of the old times. He was bound there now, for if he could get shelter for 3 days, the hue and cry would subside. When the mountaineers were certain that he must have gone past them to other places and slipped through their greedy fingers, he could ride on in comparative safety. It was an excellent plan. It gave Andrew such a sense of safety as he trotted the chestnut up a steep grade that he did not hear another horse coming in the opposite direction until the latter was almost upon him. Then, coming about a sharp shoulder of the hill, he almost ran upon a bare-legged boy who rode without saddle upon the back of a bay mare. The mare leaped cat-like to one side, and her little rider clung like a piece of her hide. "You might holler, coming around a turn," shrilled the boy, and he brought the mare to a halt by jerking the rope around her neck. He had no other means of guiding her, no sign of a bridle. But Andrew looked with hungry eyes. He knew something of horses, and this bay fitted into his dreams of an ideal perfectly. She was beautiful, quite heavily built in the body, with a great spread of breast that surely told of an honest heart beneath a glorious head, legs that fairly shouted to Andrew of good blood, and, above all, she had that indescribable thing which is to a horse what personality is to a man. She did not win admiration, she commanded it. And she stood alert at the side of the road, looking at Andrew like a queen. Horse stealing is the cardinal sin in the mountain desert, but Andrew felt the moment he saw her that she must be his. At least, he would first try to buy her honorably. "Son," he said to the urchin, "how much for that horse?" "Why," said the boy, "anything you'll give." "Don't laugh at me," said Andrew sternly. "I like her looks, and I'll buy her. I'll trade this chestnut, and he's a fine traveler with a good price to boot. If your father lives up the road and not down, turn back with me, and I'll see if I can't make a trade." "You don't have to see him," said the boy. "I can tell you that he'll sell her. You throw in the chestnut, and you won't have to give any boot," and he grinned. "But there's the house." He pointed across the ravine at a little green-roofed shack buried in the rocks. "You can come over if you want to." "Is there something wrong with her?" "Nothing much. Pop says she's the best horse that ever run in these parts, and he knows, I'll tell a man." "Son, I've got to have that horse." "Mister," said the boy suddenly, "I know how you feel. Lots feel the same way. You want her bad, but she ain't worth her feed. A skunk put a burr under the saddle when she was being broke, and since then anybody can ride her bareback, but nothing in the mountains can sit a saddle on her." Andrew cast one more long, sad look at the horse. He had never seen a horse that went straight to his heart, and then he straightened the chestnut up the road and went ahead. Chapter 18. Of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. He had to be guided by what Uncle Jasper had often described, a mountain whose crest was split like the crown of a hat divided sharply by a knife, and the twin peaks were like the ears of a mule, except that they came together at the base. By the position of those distant summits he knew that he was in the ravine leading to the cabin of Hank Rainier, the trapper. Presently the sun flashed on a white cliff, a definite landmark by which Uncle Jasper had directed him, so Andrew turned out of his path on the eastern side of the gully and rode across the ravine. The slope was steep on either side and covered with rocks, thick with slides of loose pebbles and sand. His horse, accustomed to a more open country, was continually at fault. He did not like his work and kept tossing his ugly head and champing the bit as they went down to the river bottom. It was not a real river, but only an angry creek that went fuming and crashing through the canyon with a voice as loud as some great stream. Andrew had to watch with care for a ford, for though the bed was not deep, the water ran like a rifle bullet over smooth places and was torn to a white froth where it struck projecting rocks. He found at length a place where it was backed up into a shallow pool, and here he rode across, hardly wetting the belly of the gelding. Then up the far slope he was lost at once in a host of trees. They cut him off from his landmark, the white cliff, but he kept on with a feel for the right direction until he came to a sudden clearing, and in the clearing was a cabin. It was apparently just a one-room shanty with a shed leaning against it from the rear. No doubt the shed was for the trapper's horse. He had no time for further thought. In the open door of the cabin appeared a man so huge that he had to bend his head to look out, and Andrew's heart fell. It was not the slender, raw-boned youth of whom Uncle Jasper had told him, but a hulking giant. And then he remembered that 20 years had passed since Uncle Jasper rode that way, and in 20 years the gaunt body might have filled out. The shock of bright red hair of which Jasper spoke might well have been the original of the red flood which now covered the face and throat of the big man. "Hello," called the trapper. "Are you one of the boys on the trail?" "Well, I ain't seen anything. Been about 6 others here already." The blood leaped in Andrew and then ran coldly back to his heart. Could they have outridden the gelding to such an extent as that? "From Tomo?" he asked. "Tomo? No. They come down from Gunter City up yonder, and Twin Falls." And Andrew understood. Well indeed had Hal Dozier fulfilled his threat of rousing the mountains against this quarry. He glanced westward. It was yet an hour lacking of sundown, but since mid-morning Dozier had been able to send his messages so far and so wide. Andrew set his teeth. What did cunning of head and speed of horse count against the law when the law had electricity for its agent? "Well," said Andrew, slipping from his saddle, "if he hasn't been by this way I may as well stay over for the night. If they've hunted the woods around here all day, no use in me doing it by night. Can you put me up?" "Can I put you up? I'll tell a man. Glad to have you, stranger. Give me your horse. I'll take care of him. Looks like he was kind of ganted up, don't it? Well, I'll give him a feed of oats that'll thicken his ribs." Still talking, he led the gelding into his shed. Andrew followed, took off the saddle, and having led the chestnut out and down to the creek for a drink, he returned and tied him to a manger which the trapper had filled with a liberal supply of hay, to say nothing of a feed box stuffed with oats. A man who was kind to a horse could not be treacherous to a man, Andrew decided. "You're Hank Rainier, aren't you?" he asked. "That's me. And you?" "I'm the unwelcome guest, I'm afraid," said Andrew. "I'm the nephew of Jasper Lanning. I guess you'll be remembering him." "I'll forget my right hand sooner," said the big red man calmly, but he kept on looking steadily at Andrew. "Well," said Andrew, encouraged and at the same time repulsed by this calm silence, My name is one you've heard. I am " The other broke in hastily. "You are Jasper Lanning's nephew. That's all I know. What's a name to me? I don't want to know names." It puzzled Andrew, but the big man ran on smoothly enough. "Lanning ain't a popular name around here, you see. Suppose somebody was to come around and say, 'Seen Lanning?' What could I say if you was here? I've got a Lanning here. I don't know but he's the one you want. But suppose I don't know anything except you're Jasper's nephew. Maybe you're related on the mother's side, eh?" He winked at Andrew. "You come along and don't talk too much about names." He led the way into the house and picked up one of the posters which lay on the floor. "They've sent those things through the mountains already?" asked Andrew gloomily. "Sure. These came down from Twin Falls. Now a gent with a special fine eye might find that you looked like the gent on this poster, but my eyes are terribly bad mostly. Besides, I need to quicken up that fire." He crumpled the poster and inserted it beneath the lid of his iron stove. There was a rush and a faint roar of the flame going up the chimney as the cardboard burned. "And now," said Hank Rainier, turning with a broad smile, "I guess there ain't any reason why I should recognize you. You're just a plain stranger coming along, and you stop over here for the night. That's all." Andrew had followed this involved reasoning with a rather bewildered mind, but he smiled faintly in return. He was bothered in a way by the extreme mental caution of this fellow. It was as if the keen-eyed trapper were more interested in his own foolish little subterfuge than in preserving Andrew. "Now tell me, how is Jasper?" "I've got to tell you one thing first. Dozier has raised the mountains, and I could never cross 'em now." "Going to turn back into the plains?" "No, the ranges are wide enough, but they're a prison just the same. I've got to get out of 'em now or stay a prisoner the rest of my life, only to be trailed down in the end. No, I want to stay right here in your cabin until the men are quieted down again and think I've slipped away from 'em. Then I'll sneak over the summit and get away unnoticed." Man, stay here. Why, they'll find you right off. I wonder you got the nerve to sit there now with maybe 10 men trailing you to this cabin. But that's up to you." There was a certain careless calm about this that shook Andrew to his center again, but he countered: "No, they won't look, especially in houses, because they won't figure that any man would toss up that reward. 5,000 is a pile of money." "It sure is," agreed the other. He parted his red beard and looked up to the ceiling. "5,000 is a considerable pile, all in hard cash, but mostly they hunt for this Andrew Lanning a dozen at a time. Well, you divide 5,000 by 10 and you've got only 500 left. That ain't enough to tempt a man to give up Lanning, so bad as all that." "Ah," smiled Andrew, "but don't you understand what a stake you could make out of me? If you were to give information about me being here, and you brought a posse to get me, you'd come in for at least half of the reward. Besides, the 5,000 isn't all. There's at least one rich gent that'll contribute maybe that much more, and you'd get a good half of that. You see, Hal Dozier knows all that, and he knows that there's hardly a man in the mountains who would be able to keep away from selling me. So that's why he won't search the houses." "Not you," corrected the trapper sharply. "Andy Lanning is the man Dozier wants." "Well, Andrew Lanning, then," smiled the guest. "It was just a slip of the tongue." "Sometimes slips like that break a man's neck," observed the trapper, and he fell into a gloomy meditation. And after that they talked of other things until supper was cooked and eaten and the tin dishes washed and put away. Then they lay in their bunks and watched the last color in the west through the open door. If a member of a posse had come to the door, the first thing his eyes fell upon would have been Andrew Lanning lying on the floor on one side of the room and the red bearded man on the other. But though his host suggested this, Andrew refused to move his blankets. and he was right. The hunters were roving the open, and even Hal Dozier was at fault. "Because," said Andrew, "he doesn't dream that I could have a friend so far from home. Not $5,000 worth of friend, anyway." And the trapper grunted heavily. Chapter 20 of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. It was a truth, long after wondered at, when the story of Andrew Lanning was told and retold, that he had lain in perfect security within a 6-hour ride from Tomo, while Hal Dozier himself combed the mountains and hundreds more were out hunting fame and fortune. To be sure, when a stranger approached, Andrew always withdrew into the horse shed, but beyond keeping up a steady watch during the day, he had little to do and little to fear. Indeed, at night he made no pretense towards concealment, but slept quite openly on the floor on the bed of hay and blankets, just as Hank Rainier slept on the farther side of the room. And the great size of the reward was the very thing that kept him safe. For when men passed the cabin, as they often did, they were riding hard to get away from Tomo and into the higher mountains, where the outlaw might be, or else they were coming back to rest up, and their destination in such a case was always Tomo. The cabin of the trapper was just near enough to the town to escape being used as a shelter for the night by stray travelers. If they got that close, they went on to the hotel. But often they paused long enough to pass a word with Hank, and Andrew, from his place behind the door of the horse shed, could hear it all. He could even look through a crack and see the faces of the strangers. They told how Tomo was wrought to a pitch of frenzied interest by this manhunt. Well-to-do citizens, feeling that the outlaw had insulted the town by so boldly venturing into it, had raised a considerable contribution toward the reward. Other prominent miners and cattlemen of the district had come forward with similar offers, and every day the price on the head of Andrew mounted to a more tempting figure. It was a careless time for Andrew. After that escape from Tomo, he was not apt to be perturbed by his present situation, but the suspense seemed to weigh more and more heavily upon the trapper. Hank Rainier was so troubled, indeed, that Andrew sometimes surprised a half guilty, half sly expression in the eyes of his host. He decided that Hank was anxious for the day to come when Andrew would ride off and take his perilous company elsewhere. He even broached the subject to Hank, but the mountaineer flushed and discarded the suggestion with a wave of his hand. "But if a gang of 'em should ever hunt me down, even in your cabin, Hank," said Andrew one day, it was the third day of his stay, "I'll never forget what you've done for me, and one of these days I'll see that Uncle Jasper finds out about it." The little pale blue eyes of the trapper went swiftly to and fro, as if he sought escape from this embarrassing gratitude. "Well," he said, "I've been thinking that the man that gets you, Andy, won't be so sure with his money after all. He'll have your Uncle Jasper on his trail pronto, and Jasper used to be a killer with a gun in the old days." "No more," smiled Andrew. "He is still steady as a rock, but he hasn't the speed any more. He's over 70, you see. His joints sort of creak when he tries to move with a snap." "Ah," muttered the trapper, and again, as he started through the open door, "Ah." Then he added, "Well, son, you don't need Jasper. If half what they say is true, you're a handy lad with the guns. I suppose Jasper showed you his tricks?" "Yes, and we worked out some new ones together. Uncle Jasper raised me with a gun in my hand, you might say." Said Hank Rainier. When they were sitting at the door in the semi-dusk, he reverted to the idea. "You been seeing that squirrel that's been running across the clearing?" "Yes." I'd like to see you work your gun, Andy. It was a sight to talk about to watch Jasper, and I'm thinking you could go him one better. Suppose you stand up there in the door with your back to the clearing. The next time that squirrel comes scooting across, I'll say 'now,' and you try to turn and get your gun on him before he's out of sight. Will you try that?" "Suppose someone hears it?" "Oh, they're used to me plugging away for fun over here. Besides, there ain't anybody lives in hearing." And Andrew, falling into the spirit of the contest, stood up in the door, and the old tingle of nerves which never failed to come over him in the crises was thrilling through his body again. Then Hank barked the word "now," and Andrew whirled on his heel. The word had served to alarm the squirrel as well. As he heard it he twisted about like the snapping lash of a whip and darted back for cover 3 yards away. He covered that distance like a little gray streak in the shadow, but before he reached it the gun spoke, and the .45 caliber slug struck him in the middle and tore him in two. Andrew, hearing a sharp crackling, looked down at his host and observed that the trapper had bitten clean through the stem of his corncob. "That," said the red man huskily, "is some shooting." But he did not look up, and he did not smile, and it troubled Andrew to hear this rather grudging praise. In the meantime, 3 days had put the gelding in very fair condition. He was enough mustang to recuperate swiftly, and that morning he had tried with hungry eagerness to kick the head from Andrew's shoulders. This had decided the outlaw. Besides, in the last day there had been fewer and fewer riders up and down the ravine, and apparently the hunt for Andrew Lanning had journeyed to another part of the mountains. It seemed an excellent time to begin his journey again, and he told the trapper his decision to start on at dusk the next day. The announcement brought with it a long and thoughtful pause. "I wish I could send you on your way with something worth while," said Hank Rainier at last, "but I ain't rich. I've lived plain and worked hard, but I ain't rich, so what I can give you, Andy, won't be much." Andrew protested that the hospitality had been more than a generous gift, but Hank Rainier, looking straight out the door, continued, "Well, I'm going down the road to get you my little gift, Andy. Be back in an hour, maybe." "I'd rather have you here to keep me from being lonely," said Andrew. "I've money enough to buy what I want, but money will never buy me the talk of an honest man, Hank." The other started. "Honest enough, maybe," he said bitterly, "but honesty don't get you bread or bacon, not in this world." And presently he stamped into the shed, saddled his pony, and after a moment was scattering the pebbles on the way down the ravine. The dark and silence gathered over Andrew Lanning. He had little warmth of feeling for Hank Rainier, to be sure, but the hush of the cabin he looked forward to many a long evening and many a long day in silence like this, with no man near him. For the man who rides outside the law rides alone. He could have embraced the big man, therefore, when Hank finally came back, and Andrew could hear the pony panting in the shed, a sure sign that it had been ridden hard. "It ain't much," said Hank, "but it's yours, and I hope you get a chance to use it in a pinch." And he dumped down a case of .45 cartridges. After all, there could have been no gift more to the point, but it gave Andrew a little chill of distaste, this reminder of the life that lay ahead of him, and in spite of himself he could not break the silence that began to settle over the cabin again. Finally Hank announced that it was bedtime for him, and preparing himself by this simple expedient of kicking off his boots and then drawing off his trousers, he slipped into his blankets, twisted them tightly around his broad shoulders, and with a single turn of his body was instantly snoring. Andrew followed that example more slowly. Not since he had left Martindale, however, had he slept soundly. Take a tame dog into the wilderness and he learns to sleep like a wolf quickly enough, and Andrew, with mind and nerve constantly set for action like a cocked revolver, had learned to sleep like a wild thing in turn, and accordingly when he wakened in the middle of the night he was alert on the instant. He had a singular feeling that someone had been looking at him while he slept. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. First of all, naturally, he looked at the door. It was now a bright rectangle filled with moonlight and quite empty. There must have been a sound, and he glanced over to the trapper for an explanation, but Hank Rainier lay twisted closely in his blankets. Andrew raised upon one elbow and thought. It troubled him, the insistent feeling of the eyes which had been upon him. They had burned their way into his dreams with a bright insistence. He looked again, and having formed the habit of photographing things with one glance, he compared what he saw now with what he had seen last when he fell asleep. It tallied in every detail except one. The trousers which had lain on the floor beside Hank's bed were no longer there. It was a little thing, of course, but Andrew closed his eyes to make sure. Yes, he could even remember the gesture with which the trapper had tossed down the trousers to the floor. Andrew sat up in bed noiselessly. He slipped to the door and flashed one glance up and down. Below him the hillside was bright beneath the moon. The far side of the ravine was doubly black in shadow, but nothing lived, nothing moved. And then again he felt the eye upon him. He whirled. "Hank!" he called softly, and he saw the slightest start as he spoke. "Hank!" he repeated in the same tone, and the trapper stretched his arms, yawned heavily, and turned. "Well, lad?" he inquired. But Andrew knew that he had been heard the first time, and he felt that this pretend, slow awakening was too elaborate to be true. He went back to his own bed and began to dress rapidly. In the meantime the trapper was staring stupidly at him and asking what was wrong. "Something mighty queer," said Andrew. "Must have been a coyote in here that sneaked off with your trousers, unless you have 'em on." Just a touch of pause, then the other replied through a yawn. "Sure I got 'em on. Had to get up in the night, and I was too plumb sleepy to take 'em off again when I come back." "Ah," said Andrew, "I see." He stepped to the door into the horse shed and paused. There was no sound. He opened the door and stepped in quickly. Both horses were on the ground asleep, but he took the gelding by the nose to muffle a grunt as he rose, and brought him to his feet. Then, still softly and swiftly, he lifted the saddle from its peg and put it on its back. One long draw made the cinches taut. He fastened the straps, and then went to the little window behind the horse, through which had come the vague and glimmering light by which he did the saddling. Now he scanned the trees on the edge of the clearing with painful anxiety. Once he thought that he heard a voice, but it was only the moan of one branch against another as the wind bent some tree. He stepped back from the window and rubbed his knuckles across his forehead, obviously puzzled. It might be that, after all, he was wrong. So he turned back once more toward the main room of the cabin to make sure. Instead of opening the door softly, as a suspicious man will, he cast it open with a sudden push of his foot. The hulk of Hank Rainier turned at the opposite door, and the big man staggered as though he had been struck. It might have been caused by his swift right about face throwing him off his balance, but it was more probably the shock that came from facing a revolver in the hand of Andrew. The gun was at his hip. It had come into his hand with a nervous flip of the fingers as rapid as the gesture of the card expert. "Come back," said Andrew. "Talk soft, step soft. Now, Hank, what made you do it?" The red hair of the other was burning faintly in the moonlight, and it went out as he stepped from the door into the middle of the room, his finger tips brushing the ceiling above him. And Andrew, peering through the shadow, saw two little bright eyes, like the eyes of a beast, twinkling out at him from the mass of hair. "When you went after the shells for me, Hank," he stated, "you gave the word that I was here. Then you told the gent that took the message to spread it around, to get it to Hal Dozier if possible, to have the men come back here. You'd go out when I was sound asleep and tell them when they could rush me. Is that straight?" There was no answer. "Speak out. I feel like shoving this gun down your throat, Hank, but I won't if you speak out and tell me the truth." Whatever other failings might be his, there was no great cowardice in Hank Rainier. His arms remained above his head and his little eyes burned. That was all. "Well," said Andrew, "I think you've got me, Hank. I suppose I ought to send you to death before me, but to tell you the straight of it, I'm not going to, because I'm sort of sick. Sick, you understand? Tell me one thing. Are the boys here yet? Are they scattered around the edge of the clearing, or are they on their way? Hank, was it worth $5,000 to double cross a gent that's your guest, a fellow that's busted bread with you, bunked in the same room with you? And even when they've drilled me clean and you've got the reward, don't you know that you'll be a skunk among real men from this time on? Did you figure on that when you sold me?" The hands of Hank Rainier fell suddenly, but now lower than his beard. The fingers thrust at his throat. He seemed to be tearing his own flesh. "Pull the trigger, Andy," he said. "Go on. I ain't fit to live." "Why did you do it, Hank?" "I wanted a new set of traps, Andy. That was what I wanted. I've been figuring and scheming all autumn how to get my traps before the winter comes on. My own wasn't any good. Then I seen that fur coat of yours. It set me thinking about what I could do if I had some honest to goodness traps with springs in 'em that would hold. And I stood it as long as I could." While he spoke, Andrew looked past him through the door. All the world was silver beyond. The snow had been falling, and on the first great peak there was a glint of the white, very pure and chill against the sky. The very air was keen and sweet. Ah, it was a world to live in, and he was not ready to die. He looked back to Hank Rainier. "Hank, my time was sure to come sooner or later, but I'm not ready to die. I'm too young, Hank. Well, good bye." He found gigantic arms spreading before him. "Andy," insisted the big man, "it ain't too late for me to double cross 'em. Let me go out first and you come straight behind me. They won't fire. They'll think I've got a new plan for giving you up. When we get to the circle of 'em, because they're all around the cabin, we'll drive at 'em together. Come on." "Wait a minute. Is Hal Dozier out there?" "Yes. Oh, go on and curse me, Andy. I'm cursing myself." "If he's there, it's no use. But there's no use two dying when I try to get through. Only one thing, Hank. If you want to keep your self respect, don't take the reward money." "I'll see it burn first, and I'm going with you, Andy." "You stay where you are. This is my party. Before the finish of the dance I'm going to see if some of those sneaks out yonder, lying so snug, won't like to step right out and do a caper with me." And before the trapper could make a protest he had drawn back into the horse shed. There he led the chestnut to the door, and looking through the crack he scanned the surface of the ground. It was sadly broken and chopped with rocks, but the gelding might make headway fast enough. It was a short distance to the trees, 25 to 40 yards perhaps, and if he burst out of that shed on the back of the horse, spurred to full speed, he might take the watchers, who perhaps expected a signal from the trapper before they acted, quite unawares, and he would be among the sheltering shadows of the forest while the posse was getting up its guns. There was an equally good chance that he would ride straight into a nest of the waiting men, and even if he reached the forest he would be riddled with bullets. Now, all these thoughts and all this weighing of the chances occupied perhaps half a second, while Andrew stood looking through the crack. Then he swung into the saddle, leaning far over to the side so that he would have clearance under the doorway, kicked open the swinging door, and sent the chestnut leaping into the night. End of chapter 21. Of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. If only the night had been dark, if the gelding had had a fair start, but the moon was bright, and in the thin mountain air it made a radiance almost as keen as day, and just sufficiently treacherous to delude a horse, which had been sent unexpectedly out among rocks by a cruel pair of spurs. At the end of the first leap the gelding stumbled to his knees with a crash and snort among the stones. The shock hurled Andrew forward, but he clung with spurs in hand, and as he twisted back into the saddle the gelding rose valiantly and lurched ahead again. Yet that double sound might have roused an army, and for the keen-eared watchers around the clearing it was more than an ample warning. There was a crash of musketry so instant and so close together that it was like a volley delivered by a line of soldiers at command. Bullets sang shrill and small around Andrew, but that first discharge had been a burst of snap shooting, and by moonlight it takes a rare man indeed to make an accurate snap shot. The first discharge left both Andrew and the horse untouched, and for the moment the wild hope of unexpected success was raised in his heart. And he had noted one all-important fact: the flashes, widely scattered as they were, did not extend across the exact course of his flight toward the trees. Therefore, none of the posse would have a point-blank shot at him. For those in the rear and on the sides, the weaving course of the gelding, running like a deer and swerving agilely among the rocks as if to make up for his first blunder, offered the most difficult of all targets. All this in only the space of a breath, yet the ground was already crossed and the trees were before him when Andrew saw a ray of moonlight flash on the long barrel of a rifle to his right, and he knew that one man at least was taking a deliberate aim. He had his revolver on the fellow in the instant, and yet he held his fire. God willing, he would come back to Anne Withrow with no more stains on his hands. And that noble, boyish impulse killed the chestnut. For a moment later a stream of fire sprouted out long and thin from the muzzle of the rifle, and the gelding struck at the end of a stride like a ship going down in the sea. His limbs seemed to turn to tallow under him, and he crumpled on the ground. The fall flung Andrew clean out of the saddle. He landed on his knees and leaped for the woods, but now there was a steady roar of guns behind him. He was struck heavily behind the left shoulder, staggered. Something gashed his neck like the edge of a red-hot knife. His whole left side was numb. And then the merciful dark of the trees closed around him. For 50 yards he raced through an opening in the trees, while a yelling like wild Indians rose behind him. Then he leaped into cover and waited. One thing favored him still. They had not brought horses, or at least they had left their mounts at some distance for fear of the chance noises they might make when the cabin was stalked. And now, looking down the lane among the trees, he saw men surge into it. All his left side was covered with a hot bath, but balancing his revolver in his right hand, he felt a queer touch of joy and pride at finding his nerve still unshaken. He raised the weapon, covered their bodies, and then something like an invisible hand forced down the muzzle of his gun. He could not shoot to kill. He did what was perhaps better. He fired at the mass of legs, and even a child could not have failed to strike the target. Once, twice, and again, then the crowd melted to either side of the path, and there was a shrieking and forms twisting and writhing on the ground. Someone was shouting orders from the side. He was ordering them to the right and left to surround the fugitive. He was calling out that Lanning was hit. At least they would go with caution down his trail after that first check. He left his sheltering tree and ran again down the ravine. By this time the first shock of the wounds and the numbness were leaving him, but the pain was terrible. Yet he knew that he was not fatally injured if he could stop that mortal drain of his wounds. He heard pursuit in the distance more and more. Every now and then there was a spasmodic outburst of shooting, and Andrew grinned in spite of his pain. They were closing round the place where they thought he was making his last stand, shooting at shadows which might be the man they wanted. Then he stopped, tore off his shirt, and ripped it with his right hand and his teeth into strips. He tied one around his neck, knotting it until he could only draw his breath with difficulty. Several more strips he tied together, and then wound the long bandage around his shoulder and pulled. The pain brought him close to a swoon, but when his senses cleared, he found that the flow from his wounds had eased. But not entirely. There was still some of that deadly trickling down his side, and, with the chill of the night biting into him, he knew that it was life or death to him if he could reach some friendly house within the next 2 miles. There was only one dwelling straight before him, and that was the house of the owner of the bay mare. They would doubtless turn him over to the posse instantly, but there was one chance in 100 that they would not break the immemorial rule of mountain hospitality. For Andrew there was no hope except that tenuous one. The rest of that walk became a nightmare. He was not sure whether he heard the yell of rage and disappointment behind him as the posse discovered that the bird had flown, or whether the sound existed only in his own ringing head. But one thing was certain: they would not trail Andrew Lanning recklessly in the night, not even with the moon to help them. So he plodded steadily on. If it had not been for that ceaseless drip, he would have taken the long chance and broken for the mountains above him, trying through many a long day ahead to cure the wounds and in some manner sustain his life. But the drain continued. It was hardly more than a drop by drop, but all the time a telltale weakness was growing in his legs. In spite of the agony he was sleepy, and he would have liked to drop on the first mat of leaves that he found. The crazy temptation he brushed away and went on surely, like a star of hope. He saw the light winking feebly through the trees, and then came out on the cabin. He remembered afterwards that even in his dazed condition he was disappointed because of the neat, crisp appearance of the house. There must be women there, and women meant screams, horror, betrayal. But there was no other hope for him now. Twice as he crossed the clearing before he reached the door of the cabin, his foot struck a rock and he pitched weakly forward, with only the crumbling strength of his right arm to keep him from striking on his face. Then there was a furious clamor and a huge dog rushed at him. He heeded it only with a glance from the corner of his eye, and then, his dull brain clearing, he realized that the dog no longer howled at him or showed his teeth, but was walking beside him, licking his hand and whining with sympathy. He dropped again, and this time he could never have regained his feet had not his right arm flopped helplessly across the back of the big dog, and the beast cowered and growled, but it did not attempt to slide from under his weight. He managed to get erect again, but when he reached the low flight of steps to the front door he was reeling drunkenly from side to side. He fumbled for the knob and it turned with a grating sound. "Hold on, keep out!" shrilled a voice inside. "We've got guns here. Keep out, you dirty bum!" The door fell open and he found himself confronted by what seemed to him a dazzling torrent of light and a host of human faces. He drew himself up beside the doorway. "Gentlemen," said Andrew, "I am not a bum. I am worth $5,000 to the man who turns me over, dead or alive, to the sheriff. My name is Andrew Lanning." At that the faces became a terrible rushing and circling flare, and the lights went out with equal suddenness. He was left in total darkness, falling through space, but at his last moment of consciousness he felt arms going about him, arms through which his bulk kept slipping down, and below him was a black abyss. End of chapter 22. '23 of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. It was a very old man who held, or tried to hold, Andrew from falling to the floor. His shoulders shook under the burden of the outlaw, and the burden, indeed, would have slumped brutally to the floor had not the small 10-year-old boy, whom Andrew had seen on the bay mare, come running in under the arms of the old man. With his meager strength he assisted, and the two managed to lower the body gently. The boy was frightened. He was white at the sight of the wounds, and the freckles stood out in copper patches from his pallor. Now he clung to the old man. "Granddad, it's the gent that tried to buy Sally." The old man had produced a murderous jackknife with a blade that had been ground away to the disappearing point by years of steady grinding. "Get some wood in the stove," he commanded. "Fire her up quick. Put on some water. Easy, lad." The room became a place of turmoil, with the clatter of the stove lids being raised, the clangor of the kettle being filled and put in place. By the time the fire was roaring and the boy had turned, he found the bandages had been taken from the body of the stranger, and his grandfather was studying the smeared, naked torso with a sort of detached, philosophic interest. With the thumb and forefinger of his left hand he was pressing deeply into the left shoulder of Andrew. "Now there's an arm for you, Jud," said the old man. "See them long, stringy muscles in the forearm? If you grow up and have muscles like them, you can call yourself a man. And see the way his stomach caves in? Aye, that's a sign. And the way his ribs stick out. And just feel them muscles on the point of his shoulder. Oh, Jud, he would have made a prime wrestler, this fine bird of ours." "It's like touching something dead, Granddad," said the boy. "I don't dast to do it." "Jud, there's sometimes when I just about want to give you up. Dead? He ain't nowheres near dead. Just bled a bit, that's all. Two as pretty little wounds as was ever drilled clean by a powerful rifle at short range. Dead? Why, inside 2 weeks he'll be fit as a fiddle, and inside a month he'll be his own self. Dead? Jud, you make me tired. Gimme that water." He went to work busily. Out of a sort of first aid chest he took homemade bandages, and after cleansing the wounds he began to dress them carefully. He talked with every movement. "So this here is the lion, is it?" nodded Granddad. "This here's the raving, tearing, screeching man eater. Why, he looks mostly plain kid to me." He's been shot, ain't he, Granddad?" asked the child in a whisper. "Well, boy, I'd say that the lion has been chawed up considerable by dogs." He pointed. "See them holes? The big one in front? That means they sneaked up behind him and shot him while his back was turned." "He's waking up, Grandad," said Jud, more frightened than before. The eyes of Andrew were indeed opening. He smiled up at them. "Uncle Jas," he said, "I don't like to fight. It makes me sick inside to fight." He closed his eyes again. "Now," murmured Pop. "This boy has a way with him. And he killed Bill Dozier, did he? Son, gimme the whiskey." He poured a little down the throat of the wounded man, and Andrew frowned and opened his eyes again. He was conscious at last. "I think I've seen you before," he said calmly. "Are you one of the posse?" The old man stiffened a little. A spot of red glowed on his withered cheek and went out like a snuffed light. "Young feller," said the old man, "when I go huntin' I go alone. You write that down in red and don't forget it. I ain't never been a member of no posse. Look around and see yourself to home." Andrew raised his head a little and made out the neat room. It showed, as even his fading senses had perceived when he saw the house first, a touch of almost feminine care. The floor was scrubbed to whiteness. The very stove was burnished. "I remember," said Andrew faintly. "You did see me before," said the other, "when you rode into Tomo. I seen you and you seen me. We changed looks, so to speak. And now you've dropped in to call on me. I'm going to put you up in the attic. Give me a hand to straighten him up, Jud." With Jud's help and the last remnant of Andrew's strength they managed to get him to his feet, and then he partly climbed, partly was pushed by Jud, and partly was dragged by the old man up the ladder to the loft. It was quite cool there, very dark, and the air came in through two windows. "Ain't very sociable to put a guest in the attic," said Pop between his panting breaths, "but a public character like you, Lanning, will have a considerable pile of callers asking after you. Terrible jarring to the nerves when folks come in and call on a sick man. You lie here and rest easy." He went down the ladder and came back dragging a mattress. There, by the light of a lantern, he and Jud made Andrew as comfortable as possible. "You mean to keep me here?" asked the outlaw. "Long as you feel like resting," answered the old man. "You can make about—" "Stop that fool talk about what I can make out of you. How come it you stayed so close to Tomo? Where you been lying low? In the hills?" "Not far away." "And they smelled you out?" "A man I thought was my friend." Andrew clicked his teeth shut. "You was sold, eh?" "I made a mistake." Was the other's comment. "Well, you forget about that and go to sleep. I've got a few little attentions to pay to that posse. It'll be here rarin' before tomorrow. Sleep tight, partner." He climbed down the ladder and looked around the room. Jud, his freckles still looking like spots of mud or rust, his eyes popping, stood silent. "I'm glad of that," said the old man with a sigh. "What, Grandad?" "You're like a girl, Jud. Takes a sight to make you reasonable quiet. But look yonder. Them spots look tolerable like red paint, don't they? Well, we got to get 'em off." "I'll heat some more water," suggested Jud. "You'll do nothing of the kind. You get them two butcher knives out of the table drawer and we'll scrape off the wood, because you can't wash that stain out of a floor." He looked suddenly at Jud with a glint in his eyes. "I know, because I've tried it." For several minutes they scraped hard at the floor until the last vestige of the fresh stains was gone. Then the old man went outside, and coming back with a handful of sand, rubbed it carefully over the scraped places. When this was swept away, the floor presented no suspicious traces. "But," he exclaimed suddenly, I plumb forgot. He's been leaking all the way here, and when the sun comes up, they'll follow him that easy by the sign. Jud, we're beat." They dropped, as at a signal, into two opposite chairs, and sat staring gloomily at each other. The old man looked simply sad and weary, but the color came and went in the face of Jud, and then, like a light, an idea dawned in the face of the child. He got up from his chair, lighted a lantern, and went outside. His grandfather observed this without comment or suggestion, but when Jud was gone, he observed to himself, "Jud takes after me. He's got thoughts, and them was things his ma and pa was never bothered with." End of chapter 23. 24 of Way of the Lawless by Max Brand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The thought of Jud now took him up the back trail of Andrew Lanning. He leaned far over with the lantern, studying with intense interest every place where the wounds of the injured man might have left telltale stains on the rocks or the grass. When he had apparently satisfied himself of this, he turned and ran at full speed back to the house and went up the ladder to Andrew. There he took the boots. They were terribly stained, he saw, and drew them on. The loose boots and the unaccustomed weights tangled his feet sadly as he went down the ladder, but he said not a word to his grandfather, who was far too dignified to make a comment on the borrowed footgear. Again outside with his lantern, the boy took out his pocket knife and felt the small blade. It was of razor keenness. Then he went through the yard behind the house to the big hen house, where the chickens sat perched in dense rows. He raised his lantern, and at once scores of tiny bright eyes flashed back at him. But Jud, with a twisted face of determination, kept on with his survey until he saw the red comb and the arched tail plumes of a large Plymouth Rock rooster. It was a familiar sight to Jud. Of all the chickens on the place, this was his peculiar property. And now he had determined to sacrifice this dearest of pets. The old rooster was so accustomed to his master, indeed, that he allowed himself to be taken from the perch without a single squawk, and the boy took his captive beyond the pen. Once, when the big rooster canted his head and looked into his face, the boy had to wink away the tears. But he thought of the man so near death in the attic. He felt the clumsy boots on his feet, and his heart grew strong again. He went round to the front of the house, and by the steps he fastened on the long neck of his prisoner a grasp strong enough to keep him silent for a moment. Then he cut the rooster's breast deeply, shuddering as he felt the knife take hold. Something trickled warmly over his hands. Dropping his knife in his pocket, Jud started, walked with steps as long as he could make them. He went with the spurs chinking to keep time for each stride, straight toward a cliff some hundreds of yards from the house. The blood ran freely. The old rooster, feeling himself sicken, sank weakly against the breast of the boy, and Jud thought that his heart would break. He reached the sharp edge of the cliff and heard the rush of the little river far below him. At the same time his captive gave one final flutter of the wings, one feeble crow, and was dead. Jud waited until the tears had cleared from his eyes. Then he took off the boots, and in bare feet that would leave no trace on the rocks, he skirted swiftly back to the house, put the dead body back in the chicken yard, and returned to his grandfather. There was one great satisfaction for him that evening, one reward for the great sacrifice, and it came immediately. While the old man stood trembling before him, Jud told his story. It was a rich feast indeed to see the relief, the astonishment, the pride come in swift turns upon that grim old face. And yet in the end Pop was able to muster a fairly good imitation of a frown. "And here you come back with a shirt and a pair of trousers plumb spoiled by all your gallivanting," he said, "not speaking of a perfectly good chicken killed. Ain't you never going to get grown up, Jud?" "He was mine, the chicken I killed," said Jud, choking. It brought a pause upon the talk. The other was forced to wink both eyes at once and sigh. "That big speckled feller?" he asked more gently. "The Plymouth Rock," said Jud fiercely. "He wasn't no speckled feller. He was the finest rooster and the gamest." "Have it your own way," said the old man. "You got your grandma's tongue when it comes to arguing fine points. Now go and skin out of them clothes and come back and see that you've got all that stuff off your face and hands." Jud obeyed, and presently reappeared in a ragged outfit, his face and hands red from scrubbing. "I guess maybe it's all right," declared the old man, "only they's risks in it. Know what's apt to happen if they was to find that you helped to get an outlaw off free?" "What would it be?" asked the boy. "Oh, nothing much. Maybe they'd try you and maybe they wouldn't. Anyways, they'd sure wind up by hanging you by the neck till you was as dead as that speckled rooster." "The Plymouth Rock," insisted Jud hotly. "All right. I don't argue none. But you just done a dangerous thing, Jud, and there'll be a considerable pile of men here in the morning, most like, to ask you how and why." He was astonished to hear Jud break into laughter. "Hush up," said Pop. "You'll be waking him up with all that noise. Besides, what do you mean by laughing at the law?" "Why, Grandad," said Jud, "don't I know you wouldn't never let no posse take me from you? Don't I know maybe you'd clean 'em all up?" "Pshaw!" said Pop, and flushed with delight. "You was always a fool kid, Jud. Now you run along to bed." Chapter 24